When my boyfriend told me to shut up in front of everyone, the silence that followed said more than I ever could. In that moment, he realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. When I first met Daniel, I thought I had stumbled into the kind of love people write novels about. He was charming in a quiet, calculated way, always holding doors open, pulling out chairs, paying the check before I even noticed. I was 23, still reeling from a string of shallow relationships, and Daniel seemed like the antidote, steady, responsible, grounded. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. While others got tipsy on cocktails and shouted across the table, Daniel leaned in, asking about my art degree with genuine curiosity. Most people just nod politely when I talk about design, I joked. But he smiled, really smiled, and said, then they're idiots. Creativity builds the world. I melted a little right there. Within weeks, we were inseparable. He sent me good morning texts before work and late night calls just to say he missed me. He showed up at my apartment with flowers after my first gallery submission was rejected, telling me, their loss. You'll get the next one. My friends teased me, you finally found a good one. And for the first time, I believed them. Our early months were painted in soft colors. Saturday farmers markets, long drives with the windows down, lazy Sundays with coffee and scrambled eggs. Daniel was thoughtful in ways that felt cinematic. He once left a sketchbook on my desk, inscribed with, for all the beauty you'll create. I let myself believe this was it. Stability, safety, love. But if I rewind far enough, the cracks were already there, thin as hairlines in glass. There were the jokes, for example. At first, I thought his teasing was harmless, calling me scatterbrain when I lost my keys, or Miss Picasso when my sketches cluttered the coffee table. He always laughed after, kissed my cheek, and I laughed too, brushing it off. But sometimes his laughter lingered a little too long. Sometimes the nicknames carried an edge sharp enough to sting. Then there were the small corrections. Don't wear that, it's too loud. Maybe don't bring that up at dinner, it's not the right crowd. Are you really ordering dessert? We already had pizza. Each time, his tone was calm, almost caring, so I convinced myself he was just looking out for me. I told myself love meant compromise. That couples adjusted to each other. That Daniel was simply teaching me how to be my best self. And maybe that's why I ignored the tightening in my chest whenever he sighed at something I said, or the way my words sometimes seemed to evaporate into thin air when he was around. The world saw the highlights, the couple photos on Instagram, the brunch dates, the matching Halloween costumes. No one saw the quiet recalibrations I made daily, choosing the dress he preferred, biting back the comment he might dismiss, smiling through the moments I felt small. If you had asked me then if I was happy, I would have said yes without hesitation. Because I thought stability, even flawed stability, was love. I didn't realize I was living in the shadow of something fragile, something waiting for one wrong word, one slip of the mask, to shatter completely. And that moment came the day Daniel told me to shut up. But before that explosion, there was calm. A false calm that felt like safety, but in reality, was the silence before the storm. The first Rayol crack appeared on a night that should have been ordinary. It was late autumn, the kind of chilly evening where the air smells faintly of wood smoke and damp leaves. Daniel and I had gone to his friend Mark's apartment for a casual game night. There was pizza, cheap beer, and the sound of dice clattering across tabletops. I remember laughing so hard my stomach hurt after a ridiculous round of charades. Mark mimicked a giraffe so poorly that I nearly spilled my drink. When I tried to explain what I found so funny, Daniel cut in smoothly, she laughs at anything, don't mind her. Everyone chuckled along, and I laughed too, even though a strange heat rose in my chest. It was so small, so fleeting, just a line tossed into the air. But the way he looked at me when he said it, eyes sharp and lips curled in that thin smile, made me feel like a punchline instead of a partner. That was the first bell. After that, I started noticing more moments like it. When I told a story at dinner, Daniel interrupted, correcting tiny details. What time the bus came, which restaurant we'd been to, the name of someone I'd mentioned. You get mixed up sometimes, he'd say with a laugh, but it always left me shrinking in my seat. The second bell rang on a Sunday brunch with my best friend, Lila. She and Daniel got along well enough, though I noticed how he often steered conversations away from her questions. That morning, Lila was asking me about a new project I'd pitched to a gallery. I lit up, describing my sketches, the themes I wanted to explore, until Daniel reached across the table, squeezing my hand lightly. Babe, he said smoothly, don't get your hopes up too much. You know how competitive these things are. The words were coated in honey, but the sting was undeniable. Lila *T him a sharp look, but I forced a smile, brushing it off. He's just being realistic, I told her later though inside, I hated how small I'd felt in that moment. The third bell was louder, impossible to ignore. It happened during a dinner with Daniel's parents. They were polite people, the kind who prided themselves on tasteful furniture and understated compliments. I was nervous, eager to make a good impression. Halfway through the meal, his mother asked about my art. My chest swelled as I began describing the piece I was most proud of, a massive charcoal mural that had taken me weeks to finish. But Daniel chuckled mid-sentence and said, she's exaggerating. It's not that big. Just a wall-sized doodle, really. The table laughed. I froze, fork hovering halfway to my mouth. His mother smiled, well, everyone needs a hobby, before changing the subject. I laughed weakly, cheeks burning, but inside I felt something fracture. That night, when we got home, I tried to bring it up. It hurt when you made that joke about my mural. Daniel sighed, tugging off his tie. You're too sensitive, Claire. They liked you. Why do you always twist things into something negative? I stood there in silence, unsure if I was wrong to feel wounded. Eventually, I apologized for overreacting. But I didn't forget. The bells kept ringing after that, faint at first, then louder. The way he dismissed my choice of music on a road trip. The smirk when I mispronounced a wine name at a restaurant. The sharp sigh when I brought up wanting to travel before settling down. None of these moments were explosive. They were quiet cuts, shallow but accumulating, until I could no longer ignore the sting. And though I tried to convince myself that Daniel was simply meticulous, or practical, or just teasing, part of me knew better. These weren't quirks. They were warnings. And if I had been brave enough to face them then, maybe I could have spared myself the moment when Daniel's mask finally slipped, and he told me to shut up. The winter months came, and with them, a shift I couldn't quite name. Daniel and I still had our routines, movie nights with takeout, long walks on Sundays, grocery runs where we bickered over brands of cereal. On the surface, everything looked the same. But underneath, the weight pressed harder, and the cracks widened into fissures. The pressure didn't come all at once. It built like snow layering on rooftops, heavier each day until you worry the whole thing might collapse. It started with the silences. Daniel's silences weren't peaceful. They were sharp, calculated. If I said something he didn't like, he wouldn't argue. He'd simply go quiet, his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable. The silence would stretch across hours, sometimes an entire evening, until I apologized for I don't even know what, exactly. Anything, everything. Then came the social withdrawals. Daniel started discouraging me from seeing friends. Lila's a bad influence, he'd remark casually. She puts ideas in your head. If I wanted to meet a coworker for happy hour, he'd pout, saying, so I'm not enough company for you anymore? At first, I resisted, but eventually, I caved more often than not. It was easier to cancel plans than to deal with his sulks. And so, my world shrank. By January, my once bustling weekends were quiet, spent mostly in Daniel's apartment. My sketchbooks gathered dust. When Lila texted asking why I'd been distant, I typed out a long explanation, then deleted it, settling on, just busy. Isolation settled in like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. The worst part wasn't what Daniel said, it was how he said it. His words slid beneath my skin like ice water, disguised as concern. I just don't want you to embarrass yourself. You need to think more before you speak. I'm only trying to help. But help left me smaller each time. I started second-guessing everything. Should I tell that story? Would he roll his eyes if I ordered dessert? Should I mention my new client, or would he dismiss it as unimportant? I edited myself before I even opened my mouth, carving away pieces of who I was until I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. And then there was the night I will never forget, the night when isolation became fear. It was a Friday, snow falling thick outside the window. We'd planned to cook dinner together, but Daniel came home late, tense from work. I tried to lighten the mood, playfully nudging him as I chopped vegetables. We should go somewhere warm this spring. Maybe Mexico. His knife froze mid-slice. He set it down slowly, turned to me, and said flatly, do you ever think before you speak? You know I'm saving for a house. Why would you bring up a trip? The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. His tone was enough to freeze me in place. I stammered, I just thought it might be fun. He exhaled sharply, grabbed his coat, and walked out. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the food half prepped, the silence around me suffocating. My phone buzzed with a text from Lila. Miss you. Call me. I didn't reply. How could I explain that the person I'd once bragged about now made me feel like a ghost in my own life? The pressure kept building. His words, his silences, his subtle digs, all of it stacked higher and higher until I felt crushed beneath the weight. And through it all, I told myself it was temporary. That stress at work explained his moods. That couples went through rough patches. That if I just adjusted a little more, smoothed my edges a little sharper, he'd go back to being the man who once left sketchbooks on my desk and told me I could build the world. But that man was gone. And in his place was someone who made me smaller every day. I didn't know it then, but I was standing at the edge of the cliff. All it would take was one final shove, the day Daniel told me to shut up, for me to fall. The breaking point didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived in a whisper, one of those seemingly small moments that unravels everything. It was late February, bitterly cold. Daniel had insisted we attend his firm's networking mixer at a sleek downtown hotel. I wasn't in the mood, but he brushed off my hesitation with, just try not to embarrass me. That should have been the first sign. At the mixer, I played the role of the supportive girlfriend, smiling, nodding, making small talk with strangers in tailored suits. Daniel, ever the charmer, kept a hand at the small of my back, guiding me like I was part of his presentation. But every time I spoke, about my graphic design projects, about my clients, he cut in with a joke. She thinks making logos is the same as real art. The men laughed politely. My smile tightened. Then came the revelation. I had slipped away to the restroom just to breathe, to collect myself. When I came back, I paused near the hallway, hidden behind a decorative plant. Daniel was standing with two of his colleagues, drink in hand, his voice low but distinct. Honestly, she's a mess, he said with a smirk. No ambition, just doodles and daydreams. She's lucky I even put up with her. But, she looks good enough on my arm, so. The men chuckled. Daniel raised his glass, as if toasting to the joke that was my life. I felt something inside me shatter. In that moment, it all came into focus. The silences, the digs, the way he slowly isolated me. This wasn't love. This wasn't even stress. This was who he was, someone who needed to keep me small so he could feel big. The revelation hit harder than any argument. He didn't respect me. He never had. I stumbled back before he saw me, my chest tight, the mixer noise muffled like I was underwater. In the restroom mirror, my face looked pale, almost unrecognizable. I whispered to my reflection, Is this what you've become? A punchline. That night, when we got home, I didn't confront him. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words. She's lucky I even put up with her. But the universe has a way of confirming what you need to know. 2 days later, while cleaning up the living room, I found his laptop open, half buried under papers. Normally, I respected his privacy. But that night at the mixer echoed in my ears. My hands shook as I touched the trackpad. An email was open. To his boss. The words made my stomach drop. I'll handle the Thompson account. My girlfriend can whip up some mock-ups. She's desperate for validation, so I'll tell her it's important. Saves us paying a real designer. I scrolled further. More emails, more comments, all reducing me to free labor, a convenient prop. It wasn't just his private thoughts at a mixer. It was calculated. He was using me. That was my revelation. I wasn't just unloved. I was being exploited. I closed the laptop, my pulse hammering, my body buzzing with adrenaline and rage. Every late night spent tweaking designs, every logo I'd proudly shown him, every time I thought he believed in me, it had all been a lie. He hadn't seen me as talented. He'd seen me as cheap labor. The tears didn't come. Instead, a cold clarity settled over me. This wasn't someone who slipped up in a moment of stress. This wasn't someone who deserved excuses. This was someone who saw me as less, who had no intention of ever letting me shine. And I knew then, if I stayed, I would disappear entirely. But the moment of revelation wasn't just about him, it was about me. I realized that the girl who once believed in her own art, who once laughed loudly without apology, was still inside me. She'd been buried under his silences, his cuts, his manipulations. But she wasn't gone. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something that wasn't fear. I felt resolve. And I knew, sooner rather than later, Daniel would see a side of me he never expected, the side that refused to stay silent. After reading those emails, I couldn't unsee the truth. Daniel wasn't my partner. He was my parasite. But knowing it and acting on it were two very different things. For days, I walked around in a haze, replaying every conversation, every backhanded joke, every dismissal. The puzzle pieces clicked together, and the picture was uglier than I could have imagined. But clarity brings courage. And courage brings plans. The first step was reclaiming myself, piece by piece. I started small. I dug my old sketchbook out of the closet, the one Daniel once sneered at for being childish. I filled its blank pages with drawings, raw, jagged, angry lines at first, then slowly morphing into designs brimming with the colors and energy I thought I'd lost. It felt like breathing again. I also reached out to Lila. For months I'd let her calls go unanswered, her texts brushed aside with half-hearted excuses. One evening, my hands trembling, I finally dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. Holy hell, you're alive. I thought your boyfriend had locked you in a tower. Her words stung because they weren't entirely wrong. But hearing her laugh again reminded me I wasn't alone. I poured everything out. The mixer, the emails, the silences. Lila listened without interrupting, then said, Ellie, you know what you have to do. You can't stay with someone who grinds you down just to make himself feel tall. Her certainty lit a spark in me. The second step was gathering evidence. Daniel had turned me into a punchline in front of colleagues and reduced my work to free labor. If he thought I would just slip away quietly, he was wrong. I began saving copies of his emails, forwarding them to a hidden account I created under a new alias. I also documented his texts, the ones dripping with control, the ones designed to isolate me. Each file felt like reclaiming power, brick by brick. The third step was choosing the battleground. Daniel thrived in spaces where he had the upper hand. Dinners with his colleagues, family visits where he played the golden boy. I needed a setting where truth could slice through his facade. That opportunity arrived faster than I expected. Daniel's firm was hosting a client pitch, and he casually mentioned he'd be presenting our design work. By our, he meant my mock-ups, the ones he tricked me into creating by telling me it was just practice. Make sure they're polished, he said one night, dropping files on my desk like he was giving scraps to a dog. Don't embarrass me. Instead of arguing, I nodded. But inside, my mind spun. This was it. The moment I could flip the script. I refined the designs, but I signed them, not with Daniel's name, but with my own. Then I added one subtle slide at the end, a watermark linking to my portfolio, which I had quietly built back up online. The night before the presentation, I rehearsed my counterstrike in my head. My pulse raced with equal parts fear and exhilaration. On the day of the pitch, I dressed with care, not to please Daniel, but to remind myself of my worth. A bold blazer, my grandmother's necklace, hair pulled back with sharp precision. When we arrived at the firm's sleek boardroom, Daniel was in his element, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, the perfect host. He didn't notice the tremor of anticipation in my smile. He started the presentation smoothly, clicking through the slides I had crafted. His voice was confident, rehearsed. But as the designs glowed on the screen, I saw clients nodding appreciatively, whispering to one another. My heart pounded. Then came the final slide, the one with my signature and portfolio link. Daniel froze for half a second, barely perceptible to anyone else, but I saw it. His jaw twitched. He rushed to click past it, but one of the clients leaned forward. Hold on, who's Ellie Carter? These designs are hers. The room went still. I met their gaze, steady. Yes, I'm Ellie. These are my designs. Daniel's face flushed crimson. He stammered something about collaboration, but the clients were already directing their questions to me. They wanted to know about my process, my vision, my ideas. For the first time in months, I spoke without fear of being cut off. And for the first time in months, people actually listened. Daniel tried to steer the conversation back, but it was too late. The power had shifted. The spotlight was no longer his to control. When the meeting ended, one of the clients pulled me aside. "You've got real talent. If you're ever looking for freelance work, call me." He handed me his card. Daniel seethed all the way home. The silence in the car wasn't sharp this time. It was desperate. He knew the facade was cracking, and he couldn't stop it. I stared out the window, hiding the small smile tugging at my lips. This was just the beginning. The counterstrike had landed, and Daniel had no idea what was still to come. The fallout from the pitch was immediate. Daniel tried to downplay it afterward, snapping, "You blindsided me in there. Do you know how unprofessional that was?" But the way his voice cracked betrayed his fear. His carefully constructed mask, the successful, charming man with everything under control, had slipped in front of his colleagues, and he knew it. For days, the tension in our apartment was unbearable. He stormed around, slamming cabinets, muttering under his breath. I stayed quiet, biding my time, letting him unravel while I built my next move. Because I wasn't done. Not even close. The pitch had exposed the cracks in Daniel's image, but I wanted the truth to come crashing down on him in full view, so there would be no escaping, no gaslighting, no rewriting history to make me the crazy one. And the universe, once again, delivered the perfect stage. Daniel's firm was hosting their annual gala, a glamorous event at a luxury hotel. Daniel had been bragging about it for weeks, boasting about the clients he'd impress, the deals he'd close. It was his big night, the night he lived for. Which made it the perfect battlefield. The plan was simple. I'd expose him using his own words. I had all the ammunition I needed, emails, screenshots, voice memos of his belittling remarks. With Mia's help, Lila had connected me with her tech-savvy cousin. I prepared a sleek presentation, disguised as a generic slideshow, but embedded with the evidence. It only needed one trigger, one click, to play. On the night of the gala, I walked in not as Daniel's shadow but as my own person. I wore a striking emerald gown, hair swept into a bold updo, makeup sharp enough to cut. For the first time, I felt like I belonged in a room like this, not as an accessory, but as someone who deserved to take up space. Daniel strutted around, glass of champagne in hand, basking in compliments. He hardly noticed me at first. When he finally did, he whispered in my ear, "Try not to embarrass me tonight." I smiled sweetly. "Don't worry, Daniel. I wouldn't dream of it." The night unfolded as expected. Speeches, toasts, networking chatter. Then came the moment when Daniel took the stage. He launched into his usual spiel about innovation and collaboration, his tone dripping with self-importance. I waited, my heart hammering, fingers tight around the remote in my clutch. When he clicked to transition into the company's highlight reel, the screen glitched, then shifted. Not to the firm's sizzle reel, but to the emails. The first one popped up in bold font across the massive screen. "She's desperate for validation, so I'll tell her it's important. Saves us paying a real designer." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Daniel froze mid-sentence, his face draining of color. I pressed the remote again. A second slide, screenshots of his texts, where he mocked me, called me pathetic, and joked about how easily he could control me. The murmurs turned into gasps. Daniel lunged toward the laptop at the podium, but the slideshow kept rolling, unstoppable. Voice memos played through the speakers, his voice unmistakable as he sneered, "You'd be nothing without me. Don't forget that." I stepped forward, calm, steady, my heels clicking against the marble floor. The entire room was watching. Not him, but me. "This," I said, my voice carrying across the stunned silence, "is the man behind the charm. This is who he is when no one's watching." Daniel's boss stood up, his face thunderous. Clients whispered to one another, some shaking their heads in disgust. Daniel stammered, She's lying, this is taken out of context," but the evidence was irrefutable. Security approached, unsure what to do, but the decision was made for them when one of the senior partners said coldly, "Get him out of here." Daniel's protests echoed through the hall as he was escorted out, his carefully curated world crumbling in front of everyone who once admired him. I stood there, trembling but unbroken, my heart racing with adrenaline. For once, Daniel wasn't the one in control. I was. And as the crowd began to clap, not politely, but with real conviction, I realized I had taken back more than just my voice. I had taken back my life. The night of the gala ended with Daniel being dragged out by security, his desperate denials echoing down the hotel corridor. I stood there, frozen in the spotlight, my heart thudding so loudly I thought everyone in the ballroom could hear it. But instead of humiliation, I felt something else, something I hadn't felt in months. Freedom. The days that followed were chaotic. Word spread quickly through the firm about Daniel's downfall. His emails and voice recordings weren't just embarrassing, they were professional suicide. The partners launched an internal review, and within a week, Daniel was let go. No farewell party. No golden handshake. Just a cold severance letter and whispers of disgrace. He called me the night he got the news. At first, silence. Then, his voice low and venomous. "You ruined me." I almost laughed. "No, Daniel. You ruined yourself. I just stopped covering for you." He cursed, threatened to make me pay, but I hung up before he could finish. The block button never felt so satisfying. Still, the damage he'd done to me didn't vanish overnight. I carried the bruises of his words, the isolation, the fear. But with each passing day, they faded, replaced by something stronger, resilience. I moved out of his apartment the very next morning after the gala. Lila showed up with her car, arms loaded with boxes, not even giving me the chance to hesitate. As we carried the last of my belongings down the stairs, she looked at me and said, "You're glowing. You know that, right?" Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was relief. But for the first time in forever, I believed her. With my newfound freedom, I dove headfirst into my art. I updated my portfolio, reached out to the clients who had spoken to me at the pitch, and within weeks, I had my first independent contracts. Designing logos and brand identities wasn't just work anymore. It was proof. Proof that I was more than Daniel's shadow. Proof that I was capable, talented, worthy. And slowly, I began to rebuild myself. There were moments when doubt crept in. Late at night, I'd wonder if Daniel was right, if I was just a girl with sketchbooks and dreams too big for her. But then I'd remember the applause at the gala, the clients nodding in approval, the way Daniel's mask cracked under the weight of his own cruelty. I wasn't small. He had just made me feel that way. The biggest revelation came one afternoon when I was sitting in my new apartment, sketching at my kitchen table. Noah, the young neighbor down the hall, no more than 8 years old, knocked on my door, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. My mom said, "You're an artist. Can you show me how to draw a dragon?" I smiled, waved him in, and spent the next hour teaching him how to shade wings and breathe fire onto paper. His laughter filled the room, bright and unburdened, and I realized something profound. Daniel had tried to silence me, but in the end, I'd found a louder voice. Not through anger, but through creation, through helping others believe in themselves too. I decided then and there that my story wouldn't just end with surviving him. It would continue with me thriving, inspiring, and building something he could never touch. Months later, when my freelance business had grown steady, I launched a small community workshop for young designers. People who, like me, had been told they weren't enough. We met in a rented studio once a week, sharing ideas, critiquing work, encouraging each other. Every time I saw someone's eyes light up with pride at their creation, I knew I had reclaimed what Daniel tried to take from me. And as for Daniel, the last I heard, he moved out of the city, his reputation in ruins. Part of me wondered if he ever thought about me, about the night at the gala when everything slipped through his fingers. But the truth is, I didn't care. Because my life wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, about rediscovering the girl who once believed her art could build worlds, and proving she was right all along. One evening, sketchbook open in front of me, I whispered the words I wished I could have told myself at the very beginning. They can try to shut you up, but you'll always find your voice again. And this time, no one, not Daniel, not anyone, was going to take it away from me.